Hi, I'm Yael Ben-David, and I'm the UX writer at Fundbox, and I'm going to speak in English. And I think if you can, please hold questions till the end, and we'll be able to answer them all at once if we have time. I'm going to speak about writing two sides of one transaction. Okay, so we're here at a fintech meetup, and we're talking about financial products, and financial transactions very often involve two sides that you really need with one product voice to resonate with all of those different users. A little about me. I made Aliyah from New York in 2007. Before I moved to Israel, I did a first degree in journalism at NYU. That was the beginning of my professional journey as a writer. After I moved to Israel, I decided I did not want to be a journalist and switched to neurobiology. I went to graduate school at the Hebrew University, and after a master's and PhD, decided that I did not want to be a scientist. But I was able to combine those skill sets after working for more than 10 years with very complex concepts and also writing about them in various forums. I realized I really wanted my niche to be writing microcopy for complex products, and went first to a genetics product. I've written for a cryptocurrency product, and now I'm at Fundbox, which is fintech. Okay. So I'm going to be using examples today from Fundbox. So really quickly, what is our product? So we're all on the same page. We're a credit and payment solution for businesses in the US. Right now, our product is only available in the US and only in English. And we have two products. One's credit. I'm going to focus today on payments, which is a payment method, a digital payment method. So think about online shopping, and you want to check out, and you choose whether to use your MasterCard or your Visa or your Fundbox. So you have a buyer. We're a B2B company. So your buyer might be a retailer, let's say Jimmy's Hats. And your seller would be the wholesaler. So let's call them hats wholesalers. And the buyer needs to order from the seller, and then Fundbox comes and pays the seller. Our real value prop here is that we are handling the problem of net terms, of shotef plus. Okay, so the seller wants to get paid, but the buyer can't necessarily pay until they go and sell the hats and turn a profit. So what happens is Fundbox pays for the seller, and later on the buyer will pay back Fundbox, and everybody's happy. The seller got their money up front, the buyer didn't have to put the money up front, and Fundbox obviously makes money on the transaction. But this only works if we can bring both sides to the table. Only if our voice resonates, only if our microcopy communicates with the buyers and the sellers will we offer any value, and will we succeed as a product. So first of all, we're in good company. We are by far not the only product to have this problem. eBay, big similar product, I'm gonna say. They have the same sort of two sets of segments they need to turn to, right? They need both customers and merchants on their platform to make sales. And they have an extra layer that complicates this, because they also need to speak to both B2B and B2C, business to business and business to customer relationships. LinkedIn from outside the financial space, but just to really express that this is found everywhere. If they don't have both job seekers and recruiters on the platform, they don't offer much value. So I want to talk about a few challenges that are somewhat unique to our space, unique to having this challenge of two different segments, two very different personas that we need to speak to, all within one cohesive language. And then talk about what that can mean for your product, no matter what product it is that you write. First of all, different segments have different pain. We're coming to solve a pain, right? Users are coming to us because we can fix a problem that they have. But what if your different segments have different pain? So I want to talk about the part in the flow where the buyer first orders hats from the seller. So there's a bit of a different pain here. The seller has this pain that they need the flexibility to adjust the final price, but they do not want to slow down the sale. So going back to Jimmy's Hats, they order a bunch of hats, but until the hat wholesaler actually manufactures and weighs those hats, they don't know what the shipping cost will be. So it's really important for them to know that the buyer is going to have the money, even though they can't tell them how much at the point of the transaction. So we created a feature that would solve this, which would sort of earmark some of the buyer's Fundbox funds, up to 15%, and set them aside so that they would for sure be there when the seller could give a final number. But we created a pain point with the buyer at that point, because they might feel overcharged. You don't want to order 500 hats for $5,000 and then get charged $5,550. That's not a very good experience, and you might not trust Fundbox anymore. So this is the screen that we show when the buyer has to authorize, to agree that he's willing to set this amount of money aside for this transaction. So we used estimated shipping, right? It's a 2-word string and it was a big project. How are we going to communicate that this is being set aside and that this is not the final amount? So we use the word estimated, so that they would know it could change, right? Because we're very careful to make it its own line item, right? Because if it's not estimated, then why isn't it just included in the price? It's not a tax. We tried to make that very clear. And how did we do this? It's really important for me to communicate our methodology because you're less interested in what our product says and more interested about what your product should say. So first of all, research the offline flow. This problem of needing that flexibility at the end of the transaction, this is not a problem we created at Fundbox. Buyers and sellers who use Fundbox, they didn't meet there. We're not a social network. They had an ongoing relationship and they were previously paying and accepting payments, just not with Fundbox. So they've had this conversation. What does their flow look like today? And what does their conversation sound like today? What words are they using to address this issue? And then use that common context as an anchor. So I've outlined why the seller sees it one way and the buyer sees it another way, but they are talking to each other. So what is that common space and how can we tap into that? But then workshop language that's right for our product. And what that meant in our case was we couldn't stick with estimated shipping because we work with sellers in many verticals and it wasn't always the shipping they needed to adjust for. Not everyone is selling hats that they need to weigh. For example, when you go to my meat at the butcher, you kind of know how much it's going to cost, but until you weigh it at the very end, you don't know. And we were working with meat packers who needed to reserve the extra funds because of the weight of meat. So how are we going to adjust estimated shipping to work for all of our users so that they would all use our payment platform? These are a few of the real versions that we went through. We iterated with these actual expressions, and you see that a number of them use overage. Overage is exactly the word that we want to use. It is the most accurate term. If you look it up in the dictionary, it basically will say everything Yael talked about for 5 minutes. It is the word you want to use, but nobody says that. So we're not going to say that. We also felt that security and insurance conceptually are relevant, but they come with a lot of nuance. As soon as you hear those words, triggers go off, and you think of concepts which are not what we mean. Does anyone want to guess what we went with in the end? No guesses? Shipping? In the end, we went with reserve for adjustments. Okay, and then what we did is, not only did we replace this where it used to say estimated shipping with reserve for adjustments, we also had to explain this. And so we switched this paragraph, which before talked about what we meant by estimated shipping. We ended up using shipping only as an example. So we say 15% of the order will be authorized for adjustments like shipping. We were very conscientious about where we put the line break, and we hope that this will communicate. This is a new feature we recently rolled out to these additional verticals who need this language, and we need to wait and see whether using shipping as an example is now going to be too specific and will continue to confuse those meat packers who are not using this amount for that, or if it's general enough and gets everyone on the same page. Another challenge beyond different pain and very microcopy oriented is that they use different terminology sometimes. So let's talk about the part where the Fundbox pays the seller. When are we going to pay the seller? So many sellers use a process called authorize and capture. So this is like when you go to a hotel and you give them your credit card as soon as you check in. They don't actually take any money, but they sort of check it's there, check you have the credit, and may even set it aside so that if you use the mini bar, for example, they have a way to for sure collect the money. So sellers do this. They say, okay, I'm going to authorize $5,000 of Jimmy's Hats Fundbox funds so that I know they're ready when I'm ready to capture. But these are not familiar terms to a lot of our buyers. So our buyers, yes, we're B2B, but we're working with businesses like Jimmy's Hats, which could be a mom and pop shop, brick and mortar, which like their apartments on top of it in southern Louisiana, and they have 50 hats in their store, and they haven't used the word capture in their lives. So first, again, understand the out of product conversation, because Hat Wholesalers is authorizing and capturing Jimmy's Hats funds, but I don't think they're calling it that. But what are they calling it? We're not going to educate the user. We're going to learn from them. So if they're using a term that I don't think is right, I'm not going to teach them how to write microcopy and how to be a writer. I'm going to listen to them and reflect their language back to them. So I almost think of it sometimes as an inside joke, getting in on an inside joke. They may be using language that to me is unintuitive and that to me is not precise. But if it means what it needs to mean to them, I'm going to put it in my interface as well. Here, with trying to figure out how we could talk about authorize and capture, we started by pretending there is no real world. Just focus on accuracy. What exactly am I trying to describe? And then research conventions. Consider our term in the context of the flow. So now that we have a list maybe of some things that sound good to us, and we've researched conventions to take any off the list that have any nuances or preconceived notions that we didn't know about because they're common in these specific fields, but not in my everyday life. Now think about the context in the flow. This is probably something you're familiar with when you're deciding whether to write a button or a checkbox in first person or second person. So at certain parts in the flow, the user feels like they're talking to you. With the button, they're often saying, go to my dashboard, take me to my dashboard, right? But in a checkbox, it's I agree. So we have a similar situation here where you might change the word if you're the one capturing or you're the one authorizing or not. Speak to industry experts. Before I started working at Fundbox, and I've been to plenty of hotels, I still didn't know what authorize meant. So I spoke to people who know these things, people who worked in the payments department at Amazon and who work at PayPal, and said, what does this mean to you? And use as many words as you need. Use as many words as your users need, not as you need, but however many words that they need to understand what you're talking about. At the end of the day, we're going to choose a term, and no matter what we choose, it's not going to work for everyone. You're going to need to describe it, just like I showed estimated shipping in 2 words and then a short paragraph beneath. You are going to need to expand. And I know there's this sort of gold standard of concise, and microcopy should always be concise. So I take issue with that. Working in complex products, it needs to be as concise as it can be while still saying everything it needs to be. Otherwise, what have we done as the writers? And check what other products use. You're wondering what your users are familiar with? Well, your competitors have probably done this research. You need to know not only how they speak, but how they're used to being spoken to. For example, we found that on the customer in our situation, Jimmy's Hats side of the PayPal payments platform, they do outright write authorize. So apparently this isn't as far and high level as I originally thought. Do not reinvent the wheel. Adapt it to your car, which means I'm not going to start from scratch. I'm going to go look and see what PayPal uses, but I'm not necessarily going to adopt it blindly. So we discussed authorize and process payment. Auth cap, seems like a cuter version. We're high tech and all that. Authorize and process payment, reserve funds, hold funds, freeze funds so that both sides know they'll for sure be there at the end when there's a final price. Anyone want to guess this one? We went with authorize and process payment. I gave you a hint that we found out that authorize was familiar enough, but that capture ended up being the sticky term. And every single person we asked, what does it make you think when I say process payment? Every single one, bar none, said swiping a credit card, which is exactly what we want you to think of at that time. So here's a screen where the buyer, Jimmy's Hats, is giving permission to authorize $20, but their net terms will not begin until payment is processed. So we want them to know you're going to place your order for your hats. The hat wholesaler will start making them because they're confident that $20 will be there at the end of the day. But your Shotef Plus doesn't start now. Only when there's a final price and the money has been captured or processed, only then does the clock tick on your 60 days if you have net 60. All right, there's a bonus challenge here, which is subsegments may use different terms. So until now, we've been talking about the buyer segment and the seller segment, and they may not use exactly the same terminology. But what if you have sellers and sellers who don't use the same terminology? Our entire product is a net terms product, and not all sellers call it net terms. We found out that they call it trade credit often because it's credit that they're extending, but in exchange for stuff. So yeah, you can have the 60 days, but I still have your hats. Or a deposit, which was really interesting. We had a user explicitly tell us, this is a quote, oh, I don't do net terms. I do deposits. Well, what's a deposit? 10% up front and 90% 60 days later. It's just a slightly less risky version of net terms. So what are we supposed to call this whole entire thing that we do every day? So this isn't from inside the product, but I thought it was the best way to show this point. This is from our website, the part of the website where a seller can sign up to accept the Fundbox payment method, just like they accept Visa, just like they accept any other payment method. They need to get an account open with us if they want their buyers to be able to use their Fundbox funds to make these purchases. So it says, I'm a merchant who wants to offer access to net terms, which works for everyone who knows what net terms is. Give your customers time to pay for their purchases while you get paid right away. So it's cute enough that if you do know what net terms means, it looks like marketing language and it looks friendly and it does not look like we are patronizing you or explaining to you something that's really obvious. At the same time, it's super crystal clear to someone who might a minute ago have not used that exact phrase. Next challenge, no one size fits all. This also happens. Sometimes there is no process payment solution. Sometimes you're just going to have to maintain multiple versions. And why do I say no one size fits all as opposed to not one size fits both? Bonus challenge. Sometimes there are more than two players here. So we have a situation at the part where, so we talked about how this is like the standard flow where the buyer orders from the seller, and here you have the buyer and here you have the seller. We also have this one. Boom. The agent orders on behalf of the buyer from the seller, and now I have three entities who all need to understand a single platform. Now, the main pain that comes up here is that the agent can't log in to the buyer's Fundbox account. So it's like someone calling up to make a purchase on your behalf, but they don't have your credit card. So how are they supposed to pay for it? This is what our login looks like. So say you're on an e-checkout site, an e-commerce site, and you're in the checkout flow and you have stuff in your cart and you're ready to pay and you choose Fundbox as your payment method. The next thing you do is a small iframe opens where you log into your Fundbox account. But I can't log into the Fundbox account because I'm not the buyer. Now, the seller wants this sort of complicated situation. They want us to support this flow because they want the exposure of third parties. They want agents making sales on their behalf, but not at the cost of any friction. Remember, this is a payments flow. If we cause any problems and anyone abandons the cart, then nobody's going to work with us anymore. And this buyer also wants this convenience of third parties. And the agent wants a job. Now, it gets even more complicated because the third party isn't always an agent. Another situation where you get stuck not being able to get past the login to access your Fundbox funds is when a buyer is ordering on the phone. So it happens a lot that a buyer will go to a trade show. They'll spend the weekend spending tens of thousands of dollars with all different wholesalers. 6 months later, all they want to do is reorder the exact same thing they ordered the first time. They don't need to see it. They don't need a conversation. They just want to place the order and pay. So they call up on the phone, and whomever is taking the order can't log into their Fundbox account. So this third party isn't just agents. It can be all different situations where we need to accommodate a third flow. So we took our login and added this part, which says ordering for someone else, ask them to approve this payment method. The first iterations of this ordering for someone else said, are you an agent? Until we realized that that wasn't going to work for the majority of our use cases. And ask them to approve the payment method was also a challenge because it was hard to pinpoint what we're asking them to do. So for a while, it was send a payment request, which took too much explaining and wasn't as intuitive. And this is what we ended up in the end. Again, it's the same problem as we had with the shipping, where it needs to be specific enough that everyone knows what we're talking about, but general enough, specific enough that they realize we're talking to them, but general enough also. You're going to have situations you can't get out of, however, where they have different everything, different terminology, different pain. There's just simply no way to combine them. And a great example is our Knowledgebase. This is our help center, all of our FAQs. We have sellers who want answers, buyers who want answers. And we have credit product users who want answers. Remember at the beginning, I said we're not only a payments platform, we also have a completely different product, which is a credit solution. Sort of like an ATM where users just take money, pay it back, take money, pay it back. There's no relationship. There's no two parties. And they're going to the same place to learn about Fundbox and to troubleshoot. So what did we do? The first thing you do when you think you have this situation is inventory your resources. What do you have at your disposal? We could obviously build a more sophisticated solution with deep links and a login to the knowledge base, or only linking from in product when you're in your dashboard and we know who you are. There are a million ways to solve this if we want to dedicate the resources. But, and I love when we do this, decided to use a microcopy only solution. So basically what my job was to take this place everyone comes to with different needs and different language, get the right users to where they needed to be, and get the wrong users out quickly when they went there by accident. So here you see the first sort of level that of the first place we tried to catch them would be the section titles. So each section in the knowledge base has a title that's formatted differently, and we named this one Getting Net Terms, and this one is Offering Net Terms. So we really hope that sellers will quickly gravitate toward offering, and the buyers will understand they should look for their answers in getting. But if they don't, and they end up in the wrong question, almost every single question in the knowledge base starts with some version of this sentence. We offer 2 services, a revolving line of credit and net terms. This question is about, so now if you didn't read clearly or you didn't understand or you were overwhelmed, because there are 110 questions, I think, in this knowledge base, at least if you didn't get the right user in, I can get the wrong user out and back on his way. Okay, the important part. What can you do with all of this? First of all, what do you need to do? No matter what your product is, in or out of fintech, whether you have these same challenges specific to dealing with 2 segments that you need to bring together in one product, you need to find shared content. What are the messages? What are the communications that you need to be addressing to be relevant? And what is the shared terminology? What is the language that you use that makes sense for everyone's involved? Get in on their joke, meaning use language that may be unintuitive to you if it's a convention for them. And maintain multiple versions if you must. And do it in the best way you can. How do you do that? This is the one slide you take a picture of and take home and show to your company that this is what we're going to start doing. I'm not going to read it because all except for the last 2 bullets you've already seen. These are all of the methodologies. These are all of the how you do what I showed you that we've done, and you're going to go now do as well. The 2 that I added here are workshop with product 2. There's a lot of talk, and it's good talk about workshopping with marketing their language people. They know your same users from a different angle. They know what attracts them to you in the first place. They help name features. For sure, speak with them and work out the language together. But don't forget product, especially in a complex product or in a niche product. They're the ones speccing the feature. They're most intimately connected with the problem they're trying to solve in the first place. So you really need to get a deep understanding from them of what it is you're communicating. They're going to be the experts for that. And qualitative user research includes user-facing teams, especially when you're stuck. So yes, interview users and survey them and do all of the classic ways to get in touch with and communicate with users, but also become best friends with support and sales. Support and sales, they are talking to the users who don't get it. They are speaking to the users you haven't solved for yet, and they are going to give you your greatest insights into what maybe you ought to be saying instead. Thanks so much.